Elizabeth Carter felt an uneasy stillness settle over the quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Seattle. It was dusk, and the orange glow of twilight cast eerie shadows across her front lawn. She glanced at the clock, 7:12 p.m. Victor should have returned from work already. The distant murmurs of conversation downstairs pricked at her senses, odd for a quiet evening. She moved softly toward the staircase, heart beginning to pound gently in her chest. Victor's voice was raised slightly, not angry exactly, but tense, urgent. Another voice responded, deep, calm, unfamiliar. Curiosity pushed her quietly down the steps, careful to avoid creaks in the hardwood. As she neared the bottom, Elizabeth caught sight of Victor standing in the foyer. Opposite him was a man she had never seen before. He wore a pristine white lab coat, stark against the dim entryway light, giving him an authoritative yet oddly unsettling appearance. His posture was rigid, his face partially shadowed by the angle of the hall light. Something about the way he stood, slightly hunched, his head tilted oddly, sent a chill racing down her spine. "I don't think we scheduled any appointment," Victor said, his voice wary. The stranger replied calmly, reassuringly, his voice smooth but carrying an unsettling undercurrent. "It's routine, sir. Health department guidelines. I'm just here to make sure you receive the booster promptly. Prevention is always better." Victor hesitated, glancing over paperwork the stranger had presented. Elizabeth wanted to interrupt, wanted to question the man's credentials herself, but before she could speak, Victor nodded reluctantly. "All right, if it's necessary," he sighed, rolling up his sleeve. Elizabeth lingered at the bottom step, hidden partially in shadow, watching as the stranger removed a syringe filled with dark liquid from his case. Her pulse quickened. Something felt profoundly wrong. She considered stepping forward, questioning, but a paralyzing uncertainty kept her frozen. The needle slipped smoothly into Victor's shoulder, and Elizabeth winced slightly as her husband flinched. A strange smile crossed the visitor's lips, brief, unsettling. "Everything looks good," the stranger said, packing his items briskly. "You might feel some discomfort, perfectly normal." As he turned to leave, Elizabeth retreated silently up the stairs. Through the window overlooking their driveway, she watched him vanish down the street, his white coat glowing briefly under a street lamp before he melted into darkness. She returned downstairs immediately, confronting Victor. "Who was that?" she demanded, her voice sharper than intended. Victor massaged his shoulder, already looking pale. "Just some doctor from the health department. They're making home visits now, apparently. Something about a new booster. Strange, but paperwork looked legit." Elizabeth frowned. "And you trusted him? Just like that?" Victor sighed, a touch defensive. "It seemed official enough. Let's not make a big deal out of this." Unease churned in Elizabeth's stomach, her mind replaying the stranger's odd posture, his unsettling smile. She couldn't shake the feeling something terrible had just occurred under their roof. That night, Elizabeth woke abruptly to the sound of painful groaning beside her. Flicking on the bedside lamp, she saw Victor clutching his shoulder, face twisted in agony. "Victor, what's wrong?" she asked urgently, fear tightening her throat. "Feels like it's on fire," he gasped, sweat beading on his forehead, eyes wide with panic. Elizabeth helped him sit up, her heart racing with dread. Carefully pulling back his shirt, she recoiled in horror. The injection site was swollen, angry red streaks radiating outward like spider veins. Beneath the skin, a blackish bruise was forming rapidly, like something rotten beneath the surface. "Oh my God," she whispered, grabbing her phone to call 911, hands trembling. Victor gripped her wrist, desperation flashing in his eyes. "Liz, that wasn't a doctor. I felt something off, but I just ignored it." Her stomach dropped. "Who was he then?" Victor shook his head weakly. "I don't know, but I've seen him before. I just can't remember where." Fear gripped Elizabeth, colder and darker than anything she had ever felt. As sirens approached, she knew their nightmare was only beginning. A shot that burns. Victor Carter lay in the hospital bed, drenched in sweat and barely conscious. His shoulder, once pink and healthy, had transformed into something grotesque. The skin around the injection site was an unnatural shade of grayish black, radiating thin red veins that pulsed with each heartbeat. Elizabeth sat by his side, gripping his hand tightly, trying to mask her fear. The ER was a whirl of motion. Doctors barked instructions, nurses wheeled in machines, and the beeping of monitors filled the sterile air. Dr. Lena Patel, a no-nonsense infectious disease specialist, studied Victor's condition with a furrowed brow. "We're dealing with necrotizing fasciitis," she explained, her voice urgent. "It's rare and aggressive. He's being prepped for emergency debridement. We need to remove the infected tissue immediately." Elizabeth's mind spun. But he only got a shot, a booster. Yesterday evening. How is this even possible? Dr. Patel hesitated. Infections like this don't start from vaccinations, not unless something incredibly contaminated was injected, or something else entirely. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. "You mean deliberate?" Dr. Patel nodded slowly. "We've contacted the CDC, but this isn't standard protocol. You said the injection was given at your home?" "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "A man in a white lab coat claimed he was from the health department." Dr. Patel frowned. "That doesn't make sense. We're not conducting home visits." Something cold and sharp twisted in Elizabeth's gut. Later that evening, while Victor was in surgery, Elizabeth drove home, unable to sit still. The streets were wet from a light drizzle, city lights reflecting off the pavement. She pulled into the driveway and rushed inside. Her mind was on fire. She went straight to their home security system and began reviewing the footage from the previous night. The feed was dark and grainy, but it captured just enough. A man, slightly hunched, walked up to the house wearing a long white coat. He avoided looking directly at the cameras. Elizabeth froze the frame. His body language was familiar, off-kilter in a way she couldn't quite place. Fast-forwarding, she watched as he exited the house 20 minutes later, his face still hidden by the shadows and camera angle. But for one brief second, as he turned toward the sidewalk, the porch light caught the side of his face. Elizabeth zoomed in, heart pounding. A scar, a small curved line just above his left eyebrow. She stared, unblinking. That scar was buried deep in her memory. It belonged to Daniel Hartley, her stepbrother, missing and presumed dead for the last 17 years. Her breath caught in her throat. She stumbled back from the screen, dialing 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? My husband is in surgery. Someone injected him with something that's killing him. I have footage. I know who it was. His name is Daniel Hartley, and he's supposed to be dead. There was a pause on the line. Then the dispatcher calmly asked for her location and assured her that officers were en route. Within 30 minutes, detectives arrived. Elizabeth showed them the footage, explained everything. How Daniel was presumed dead after a boating accident, the ugly inheritance battle, and how he'd vanished without a trace. Detective Marissa Blake, a tall, composed woman in her 40s, leaned against the kitchen counter as Elizabeth spoke. Her eyes never left Elizabeth's face. "You're certain it's him?" she asked quietly. Elizabeth nodded. "That scar, he got it when we were kids. It's him. I'm sure of it." Detective Blake exchanged glances with her partner and turned back to Elizabeth. "We'll run facial recognition based on the footage. If he's in any recent databases, we'll find him. But if he faked his death, he may have built a new identity." Elizabeth sat down at the kitchen table, her legs giving out beneath her. He must have planned this. He knew how to avoid the cameras. He even convinced Victor to let him inside. As the detectives left to begin the investigation, Elizabeth's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. "You always were the smart one, but you're too late." Her hands trembled as she read the message. Another text followed. "Tell Victor I said goodbye." She gasped, grabbing her coat and bolting out the door, racing back to the hospital. By the time she reached the emergency ward, Dr. Patel met her in the hall. "He made it through the surgery. Barely. The infection was deeper than we thought, but we believe we got it all. He's stable for now." Relief crashed over Elizabeth, but the texts echoed in her mind. Daniel wasn't finished. He had played his first card, and she was sure he had more. In the sterile light of the hospital corridor, Elizabeth made a vow. Whatever Daniel was planning, she would stop him. One way or another, this nightmare wasn't going to consume her family. The rain hadn't stopped since Elizabeth returned home from the hospital. Outside, the windows shimmered with water streaks, blurring the view of her normally peaceful Seattle suburb into an ominous wash of gray. Inside, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen counter with her laptop open and her home security system footage queued up on screen. She dragged the timeline back to the night before. the moment Victor claimed he received the injection. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of her didn't want to see it again, but she had to. She needed to understand what really happened. The footage began to play. The man approached their front door precisely at 7:04 p.m. He wore a white medical coat, the kind worn by doctors making house calls decades ago. But what stood out more was how he moved, like his body didn't quite sync with itself. His gait was disjointed, shoulders slightly hunched forward, as though his limbs were too heavy or he wasn't used to walking upright. His head remained low, face hidden beneath the shadows of a porch light. Elizabeth paused the video and zoomed in. For just a second, as he turned toward the door, a sliver of his face caught the light. The scar. The same faint, crescent-shaped scar above his left eyebrow. Her breath hitched. A memory surfaced, uninvited and sharp. Daniel. She hadn't said that name aloud in nearly 17 years. Her stepbrother, her mother's second husband's child from a previous marriage. Daniel had always been different, quiet, brooding. They'd grown up under the same roof, but he'd never really been part of the family. He died, or so they'd been told, in a boating accident shortly after their father passed away. No body was ever recovered. It was tragic, and Elizabeth remembered how her mother's grief had quickly been replaced by silence, no funeral, no obituary. Just the quiet erasure of Daniel's name from their family. And yet, here he was. The doorbell rang. Elizabeth jumped, her heart leaping to her throat. She hesitated, then slowly approached the front door, peering through the peephole. A uniformed figure stood under the porch light, Detective Marissa Blake, her raincoat dripping. Elizabeth let her in. "We got your call," Blake said as she stepped inside, glancing around. "You mentioned footage. Can I see it?" Elizabeth gestured to the laptop and hit play again. Blake watched intently. She didn't speak until the video ended. "You're certain this is your stepbrother?" "Yes," Elizabeth whispered. "That scar, I remember it clearly. He got it when we were kids. Fell off a ladder in the backyard." Blake sat down, pulling out a small notepad. "You said he was declared dead?" "Boating accident. But there was always something suspicious. No one looked too closely. After our father passed, Daniel spiraled. There was a lot of anger over the will. My mom inherited everything. Daniel got nothing. Then one day, he disappeared. The boat was found. His wallet was on board. The police assumed he drowned." Blake nodded slowly. "If he faked his death and re-emerged now, there's a motive, revenge, grievances tied to inheritance. That might explain why he targeted your husband." Elizabeth swallowed hard. "Victor and I still live in the family home. Maybe that was the trigger." Blake looked up. "You might be right. We've already submitted the footage for facial recognition. If he's used any identity in the past few years, we'll find him." Elizabeth opened her mouth to respond when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "You're watching old footage, Liz, but I'm already ahead. You're always one step behind." Daniel's voice. It was unmistakable, calm, cold, like someone narrating a bedtime story laced with poison. "Leave Victor in peace," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was never part of this," Daniel said, almost gently, "but he was in the way." The call ended. Elizabeth stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Detective Blake's expression was unreadable. "You recognize the voice?" she asked. Elizabeth nodded, her voice trembling. "He's watching us." They scanned the house. No signs of entry, nothing obviously tampered with. But Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel had been inside, that maybe he never left. Blake assigned an officer to remain on watch outside the Carter home for the night. As she left, she turned to Elizabeth and said, "We'll find him. But be careful. People who fake their deaths don't come back unless they have a plan." As the door shut behind the detective, Elizabeth stood in the hallway, listening to the rain. Her home no longer felt safe. Her past had returned, cloaked in a white coat and armed with something far deadlier than hate. She walked to Victor's study and opened an old chest where they kept family documents. Among the yellowed folders and photo albums, she found a weathered envelope. Inside, the last known photo of Daniel. He looked almost normal, a slight smile, that scar. But now the image felt like a warning. She turned the photo over. On faded pencil, someone had written, "The ones left behind never forget." Elizabeth stared at the words, her mind racing. Daniel wasn't just angry. He was coming for everything he believed he lost. The following morning brought little peace. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained a heavy, overcast gray, an ominous ceiling pressing down over Seattle. Elizabeth sat alone in Victor's hospital room, staring blankly at the pale light seeping in through the blinds. Victor was asleep, weak but stable after his surgery. The infection had been stopped for now. Her mind, however, raced uncontrollably. She kept replaying Daniel's voice in her head. "You're always one step behind." He had spoken with chilling calm, like someone who had rehearsed those words 100 times. And that meant something. This wasn't impulsive. It was planned. Elizabeth pulled out the old family file she had retrieved from the study. Inside were documents her mother had kept after her husband's death. Legal papers, old wills, property deeds. One page stood out. A revision to the will made just weeks before their father's death. It clearly outlined that the entirety of the estate, including the family home, would pass solely to Elizabeth's mother, with no provision for Daniel. She remembered the arguments back then. Daniel shouting, slamming doors, claiming the home was his birthright, that their father had promised it to him. But when the final version of the will surfaced, Daniel had disappeared. No one had seen him since, until now. Her phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. "I never wanted to hurt Victor. That part wasn't personal. But this house, this family, it was mine long before you existed." The text included a photo, the front of their home, taken from the sidewalk. Elizabeth's blood turned cold. He was nearby. She rushed out of the hospital and drove straight home, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. As she pulled into the driveway, a sense of violation prickled over her skin. The house felt wrong, as if someone had breathed new darkness into its walls. Inside, everything looked untouched, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She moved room to room, opening closets, checking behind furniture. Then she reached the basement. She hadn't stepped down there in months. The moment her foot hit the concrete floor, the air changed. It was colder, mustier. And then she saw it, footprints in the dust, fresh, leading to the old storage closet in the far corner. Elizabeth slowly opened the door. Inside was nothing, at first glance. Then she spotted the vent at the back. Its screws were missing. Crawling inside would lead directly into the subfloor crawlspace. It wasn't much, just enough room for someone small or someone desperate to hide. She backed away, heart pounding. She called Detective Blake. "He's been inside," Elizabeth whispered. "The basement, the crawlspace. He's been using the house, watching us." Within the hour, police officers swept the property. Forensics confirmed recent movement in the crawlspace, fibers from a white coat. An old backpack containing gloves, syringes, and an unlabeled vial was discovered tucked behind the water heater. A note was folded inside the bag. "You replaced me. You erased me. This home remembers me, even if you pretend I never existed." Detective Blake turned to Elizabeth later that evening. "We traced the vial's residue. It's not any known medical compound. But agricultural labs have seen something similar, an experimental pesticide compound, highly toxic in small doses. Absorbed through injection, it mimics necrotic infections. The delivery system? Exactly like a vaccine." Elizabeth sat silent. Daniel hadn't just tried to poison Victor. He wanted it to look like a medical anomaly, something that would delay the investigation just long enough for him to finish what he started. "This was personal," Blake added. "He didn't want you just to suffer loss. He wanted the house, to destroy everything that excluded him." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "He never wanted a share of the family. He wanted to erase us and take what he thought was his." Blake paused. "There's more. We found financial records under the alias Michael Rayner. It's Daniel. He's been moving around for years, buying supplies, tracking your habits. This plan's been in motion for a long time." Elizabeth felt a wave of nausea. Years. He'd been watching, calculating. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the yard. The treehouse they used to play in was still there, weathered, leaning. Daniel had carved his name into its frame when they were children. She remembered his face the day her mother read the will out loud. His eyes hadn't been filled with sadness. They burned with betrayal. Now she understood. He had never forgiven them, and he never would. But Elizabeth also knew something else. Daniel had made one critical mistake. He underestimated how much she remembered, and how far she would go to stop him. It was nearly midnight when Elizabeth heard the chime of her front door security app. someone had triggered the motion sensor. She grabbed her phone, heart already pounding, and tapped into the live feed. The street was empty. Then a figure appeared, briefly, moving along the sidewalk. Just a flash of white, her breath caught. Daniel. She didn't call the police this time. Not right away. Instead, she texted Detective Blake directly. He's outside. Come now. I'm setting the trap. Over the last 24 hours, Blake had helped set up additional surveillance throughout the property. Hidden cameras had been installed around the home, and Victor, still recovering, had allowed access to the dash cam on his car, which sat parked in the driveway. Elizabeth knew Daniel would return. The house was bait, and she was the trigger. She walked calmly to the living room, every light in the house left off, just her silhouette by the front window, waiting. Minutes passed. Then, movement. The back door creaked. Elizabeth stayed perfectly still, clutching a flashlight in one hand, her phone in the other. The app was recording everything. From the corner of her eye, she saw him enter. A figure dressed in civilian clothes this time. No lab coat, but unmistakably Daniel. His presence filled the air like rot. Quiet, precise. He stepped forward, eyes on her. She turned. "Hello, Daniel." He stopped, smirked. "You're not as clever as you think. You still don't see the whole picture." Elizabeth's voice was steady. "You poisoned Victor. You tried to kill us. For what? A house?" Daniel's expression shifted. "This house was everything. My childhood, my father. You stole it. Your mother stole it. Then she tried to erase me." "No one erased you," Elizabeth said sharply. "You disappeared. You let hate define you." His eyes flicked toward the hall. Elizabeth noticed him tense. He was planning something. "You're not leaving here tonight," she said calmly. "And I have the proof." He laughed once. "You have nothing." Elizabeth raised her phone. "Victor's dashcam caught you. It triggered when you walked past his car that night. A clear shot of your face. Facial recognition already confirmed it. The footage is with the police." Daniel's smile froze. "I didn't see the camera." He started, but stopped. He knew. Outside, the sound of distant sirens grew louder. Elizabeth didn't flinch. "They're coming. You'll never hurt anyone again." Daniel lunged forward. But before he could reach her, two figures burst through the front door. Detective Blake and an officer with a taser drawn. Electricity cracked through the air. Daniel collapsed, writhing on the floor, then went still. The room fell silent, but for the sound of his ragged breathing. Elizabeth let the flashlight drop from her hand. Blake moved quickly to cuff him, reading his rights with mechanical calm. "He was coming for me," Elizabeth whispered. "He told me. I think he would have killed me." Blake nodded. "He's been watching you for weeks. We found a laptop in a storage unit registered under his alias. It had footage, live feeds from a hidden camera inside your home. He planted it weeks ago. He's been planning this down to the hour." Elizabeth's legs gave way and she sank into the couch. The realization struck hard. He had been there, watching them sleep, watching them argue, watching them lie. Her past had literally been hiding in the walls. Later that week, the trial was fast-tracked. Daniel Hartman was charged with attempted murder, unlawful use of biological toxins, breaking and entering, and multiple counts of stalking. His defense claimed mental instability, but the evidence was overwhelming. Victor testified from his hospital bed. Elizabeth stood on the witness stand and spoke clearly, her voice unwavering. He didn't want justice, he wanted revenge, and he was willing to destroy everything, everyone, to get it. The prosecution played the dashcam footage in court. Daniel's face, half-turned, illuminated briefly by a passing streetlight as he moved away from the Carter home. A perfect frame. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. Daniel Hartley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Weeks passed. Victor slowly recovered. The physical wounds began to fade, but the emotional ones lingered. The house no longer felt like home. The crawl space had been sealed, new locks installed, security tightened, and yet every creak of the floorboards at night still made Elizabeth's heart stutter. One evening, she sat with Victor in the backyard. The sky was finally clear, stars blinking quietly above them. Victor reached for her hand. "It's over," he said gently. Elizabeth nodded, but in her mind she knew the truth. Some ghosts don't leave, they just change shape. She stared at the treehouse in the corner of the yard, faded, broken, but still standing, just like her.